So we've talked about the problem with officers and resisting arrest and lack of discipline. Let's now talk about problems with grand juries when it comes to both the Eric Garner case and the Michael Brown case. We're really looking at all angles of this. We've talked about already police officers being able to use resisting arrest to justify force. Problem two, which really needs some significant analysis, is that of the grand juries, including the instructions that grand jury members receive, we are seeing significant problems when it comes to these cases of possible overuse, improper use of police force. Lawrence O'Donnell reported that after reviewing transcripts of the Michael Brown, Darren Wilson grand jury, they discovered that the assistant DAs that were working for prosecutor Bob McCulloch gave the jurors an outdated copy of Missouri law, which stated all that was required for an officer to use deadly force is their reasonable belief that there was a threat. And Missouri Attorney General Chris Koster told Lawrence O'Donnell, among the problems that Ferguson has brought to light is the need to update Missouri's use of deadly force statute. The statute is inconsistent with the Supreme Court's holding in Tennessee versus Garner. We have a very clear problem here when the threshold, the barometer that is being presented to the grand jury to decide whether there should be an indictment or not is one that has already been ruled invalid years ago by the Supreme Court. Whether the prosecutors, Lewis, presented this incorrect law to a law that violates the Supreme Court's ruling to the grand jurors out of ignorance or out of a deliberate desire to mislead doesn't matter. They were presented with instructions that the Supreme Court said are not valid.
There are a lot of questions around what was going on with the grand juries here and the way evidence was presented, and things were not done properly, especially in the Michael Brown case. But yes, this is a huge problem.
And then looking at the grand jury with Eric Gardner, NBC New York might have an explanation as to how Officer Daniel Pantaleo managed to completely avoid any charges. According to NBC sources, the Staten Island District Attorney Daniel Donovan only asked the grand jury to consider charging Pantaleo with manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. These are more difficult charges to get in New York City because, as the New York Daily News explains, they imply that the cop knew his actions could result in death or serious injury and did them anyway. To be perfectly accurate and proper, the grand jury should have been presented with the option of charging Pantaleo with something less dangerous, and then charges could have been modified as evidence came out. The grand jury was not presented with that option at all. Again, not proper conduct by the DA. And what we're seeing, Lewis, is that in general, district attorneys and prosecutors work with police. And then all of a sudden, in the rare case where they're working against police, we expect there to be absolutely no conflicts. This is why we need special prosecutors brought in. This is why we're seeing a disproportionate lack of indictment when a grand jury reviews a case involving a police officer perpetrator, when we almost always see indictments in grand juries more broadly.
In cases like this, it always seems that the DA and the police department are working together to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible, and it's in both of their best interests, I guess, to make sure that police officers don't get convicted of anything. Sometimes it's different when there are just other corruption type charges involved with police officers. But when it comes to this type of stuff across the board, everything seems to be the same.